for absence, so we certainly have apologies from Virginia. And do we have apologies from Nigel? Okay. Right. Okay, so no, Nigel's absence. We'll check up on him, make sure he's all right. So item 2 is to approve the minutes as a correct record for the 28th of March. Were there any questions on the minutes?
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Can I just ask on your minutes of page 5, item 235, I wasn't at the last cabinet meeting. My colleague, Councillor Fitch-Tillett, asked a question on my behalf, which I understand went into a private session. I have checked with Councillor Fitch-Tillett. Neither her or I have had any reply at all. I wonder if someone could chase that up for us, please. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, well, I propose that they are accepted. Everyone's happy to second that by Lucy, and everyone's happy, presumably. Thank you. We don't have any public questions or statements. There are no items of urgent business, declarations of interest. Just the one for me in relation to item 10 and North Lodge Park. I'm obviously a Cromer Town Councillor. That is, of course, in my forms already. But just for information, I presume there are no other declarations of interest? No. Members' questions. I don't know if there's anything, John, Nigel, you want to ask them now? No. Okay. Are there any recommendations? There are no recommendations, I should say, from the Ovian Scrutiny Committee, 6th of April. So the first substantial item is...
Mr. Chairman,
sorry, go ahead, Nigel.
Might I just intervene at this point? There are no recommendations from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, but there is a recommendation from a panel of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which relates to item 9 on your agenda. I'm not sure whether you have sight of that recommendation, but it was certainly one that's been forwarded to me, and it recommends approval of the quality of life strategy subject to consideration of the inclusion of demonstrable and measurable outcomes. So essentially what it's recommending is that you give consideration to the inclusion of those indicators that will help to show and demonstrate measurable outcomes of that strategy. Now, I'd just like to also make mention of some correspondence from one of that working group to Mr. Hems, and I think it's been copied into Democratic Services as well, in relation to some examples of how those indicators might be included. And so there is an email which conveys some of that information. I don't know whether you necessarily want to drill down to that level today. You may want to satisfy yourself that there is some merit in including such indicators, and then leaving that for officers to, I think Mr. Hems, I think you were copied into that correspondence from Councillor Holliday. So that really was my input in respect to the activity of the panel of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you, Nigel. That's useful. I hadn't seen any of that information. Steve, do you want to say anything now? And then I've got Lucy.
Thank you. Yes, I can confirm that I've had that correspondence from Councillor Holliday. I think in terms of the intent, it's about, Councillor Holliday was very kind to identify some possible areas that we could look at. I'm not sure that they are the finished, polished article. They are just areas where there are opportunities for data already to be to exist. that fit within some of those priorities. So I think, I understand Councillor Dixon's subject to in the recommendation. I don't think the intent was to include them before the document was approved, because that element of the document is a working a working document in terms of the action plan, and therefore it's intended to develop those as we develop the action plan itself. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Lucy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted a little bit of clarification on that, if that's okay. Is that in addition to the final column in Appendix 7?
Of the strategy?
Of the strategy, just so that I can understand.
So obviously it's referring to the action plan, but I don't know if we've had time to examine it. Steve, I don't know if you can help us at all.
Sorry, Councillor Shires, could you just ask that again? Because
Yeah, okay. In Appendix 7, the final column is about the outcome and measures with the timescales to the left of it.
yes,
I was just curious to understand whether or not the recommendation from the panel was to drill down a little bit into those, or whether or not it's in addition to what we already have there.
no, my understanding it's in relation to the outcomes that are set around the action plan. I think probably the position is that as members will realise, some of the elements around quality of life in particular are quite delivered over quite a prolonged period of time. But it was felt, I think, within that panel that there was certainly benefit and opportunity to actually have more measurable outcomes than perhaps were specified within the action plan in a number of the areas. I'm sure Karen Hill can add more information for you.
So the intention is to actually, on an annual basis, look at the Thriving Places Index. So there's a huge amount of secondary data that make up each of the elements of the Thriving Places Index. So we will be looking at each of those in terms of looking at our particular performance in terms of North Norfolk, and then how that's built up to actually look at our position in terms of our overall result in terms of the Thriving Places Index. But I think what we just wanted was to look at our specific actions. And yes, there are some measures within each action, but it's as we kind of develop the strategy, as we move forward with developing those actions, it's making sure that what we are measuring is robust enough to demonstrate, is it actually making a difference against that particular aspect of quality of life. And so that's where it is in terms of its development, because it's a combination of a number of different, so very technical data, which is reported independently mainly through the ONS, and then the activities and measures that we can actually look at directly in terms of what's happening on the ground in North Norfolk. So it's a combination of the two.
Thank you, Karen. That's fantastic. Okay, well, let's move on. We'll come back to the item shortly. So item 8 is the officer delegated decisions for February and April. You have this, I think it's page 13, and there are the 3 listed delegated powers that have been exercised. Were there any questions on those items? Okay, so sorry, Nigel, go ahead.
I'm just trying to find my page here.
Sorry. Oh, is there? Sorry. So it's 13 or 15. Is that okay?
My question was in relation to section 5.1. Third item.
question is that in line with national rates and rates in some way? And what are the trigger points for such in line with authorities?
Okay, well, we've clearly had the approach from the Joint Staff Consultative Committee. I believe there are other councils that have increased that level. Not Norfolk County Council, I think that was noted. But given the significant increase in fuel costs, I think that was expected. So I've got Duncan, go ahead. Never works, does it? That one?
Apologies. Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. Yes, I think it's a temporary increase that we're proposing. I think there have been discussions held with Unison, and the head of HR has been looking at this as an issue because there is increasing pressure across the country in terms of cost of living and things like that. So I think the idea was that we considered how this might be impacting on staff. The proposal was for, I believe, a 3-month temporary increase, at which point it will be reviewed again. So I think there are other organisations that are looking at similar support for staff, but just to reassure members, it's a temporary increase that will be reviewed. So it's not a permanent decision that has been taken to increase these rates at the moment.
Thank you.
So if I might just clarify, Mr. Chairman, we are on our own in respect of that decision. That is not one that's been taken on with consultation with other district or borough councils.
It's not a national position, no, to increase. This is a local decision that we've taken, but if it's useful, I can try and get some more information about others that are providing similar support locally and nationally, but it's not a national position at the moment, no.
Should go ahead.
And is this officers or officers and members?
Both.
Both.
Yeah. John, go ahead.
Can I just clarify through Duncan, the 15p difference between the 45p standard and the 60p is taxable?
I think it is, yes, yeah.
So it will affect people's tax rates accordingly?
Potentially. I mean, when the HR manager had looked at it, I don't think there was anticipated to be any significant impact on staff. We have got a number of pool vehicles, so these rates won't apply if people are using those vehicles. We have a number of vehicles across various different teams, like the property and leisure teams. So again, those people that are out and about the most around the district won't be impacted by this either. So it's not considered to be a significant impact.
Brilliant. Okay, any other questions on this item? Okay, so happy to note item 9 is the quality of life strategy. So first of all, just wanted to thank Karen. Extraordinary amount of work here. I know was undertaken to fit this in, and I'm very pleased with what's been produced. Certainly support the approach on surveys and updating the strategy early. We would have liked to have carried out some face-to-face consultation and learning, I believe, but clearly that hasn't been possible. But we do have lots of existing data sources from which we can work on. Is there anyone, Karen, do you want to kick us off here in terms of telling us a bit about, and then I'll come to Wendy? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Shall I go first? I have a written statement from Virginia, who is portfolio holder for Quality of Life Strategy. Good morning, everyone. The Quality of Life Strategy is the result of a good deal of work and thought, and I recommend it to you. The strategy seeks to define quality of life. It analyses the research which underpins quality of life. It examines the various tables of comparison which measures accomplishment in this area. Perhaps most important of all, it suggests a profile for North Norfolk so that we may have an understanding of where our weaknesses may lie.
A good district council such as ours does not simply work to pick up rubbish, collect taxes and deliberate planning decisions. It has it has the ability to make life better for its residents. It can choose to provide safe and stimulating play areas for children, public conveniences, places to walk in the outdoors freely and easily. It can help people getting medical appointments, make it more likely that one may find a decent job, make it less likely that people are homeless. I might add many more things, but if you read the action plan, you will see the picture. The strategy has now been studied within and without the District Council. It has received support from Councillor Blaithwaite's scrutiny panel, from members of the new Health and Wellbeing Partnership, Public Health and Norfolk Police. The action plan is a live document. It will alter as situation changes and we will make further accomplishments. It is a foundation for future work rather than a blueprint. Finally, there's a matter of objective measurement. There are many measurements which may apply. How many people went swimming last year? How many children under 3 were taken to one of our play areas? Is the number declining? How many hectares of woodland do we have? Do we have plans to increase this? What about allotments? But to do a good job in the future, we must dig deeper. How would these measurements demonstrate that our residents had better lives? This is what we need to work on. Which things lie within our power and would be most helpful? That is our next step. In closing, I would like to thank Karen, Sonia, Steve for all their work towards the strategy. I'd also like to thank Councillor Dr. Holliday, who has recently made very insightful contributions to the thinking about measurement. I hope that you can all support this. And as myself, I'd like to move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, well, I just wanted to, I don't really see this as a sort of critique of quality of life in Norfolk, certainly an appraisal and recognition of where we can do more. Lots of individual actions and interventions here, some very tangible, leading to various projects. Members and officers know I'm very keen that we progress the play strategy. That's one aspect that I'm really quite keen on us doing, and welcome the work that's being done there. I see the engagement strategy as one of the next steps. Can I ask how that's going, the development of that policy? Thank you. That strategy, sorry.
That's sitting with me at the moment. The draft is complete or substantially complete. It is going to overview and scrutiny for pre-scrutiny at the next meeting, I understand, and that Matt and I have had a discussion today about last week about the position in terms of some of the questions we might ask scrutiny to consider around that. So yes, it is substantially drafted, although as you will imagine, being an engagement strategy, we want to make sure that we get the engagement right around it, and so there is some bits that we want to do in terms of further engagement with some of our key stakeholders.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Okay, any other questions? John, go ahead. I'll get the right button.
Morning, everybody. Morning. Karen, thank you for this. Clearly, looking through it, it's a huge amount of work and data you've gone through. And it's interesting to see the things that are, like the growth in food banks and things like that. So it's interesting stuff that comes out of that. I had one question, and that's on page 1842. It's numbered here. It's just about the review of the document. There's a lot of document, I accept that. review on a quarterly basis and a more formal annual review. I just wondered if you had any vision of where that may be reported or how that may be reported.
So the quarterly review will be an update to portfolio holder in terms of then updating for council through those reports. And I think the annual report, we haven't actually discussed where it would go to, but it could go to scrutiny. But I think we just want to make sure that we're, you know, where we want to be, because that 2-year period is quite short. It will go very quickly, and we want to be able to demonstrate that you know, our understanding of quality of life is where we want it to be. The key thing we want to be able to put ourselves in a position to do is that community engagement, hence the engagement strategy being quite key in terms of moving that forward so that we can then develop our engagement, because that takes time. And we want to build that level of trust with our communities, our residents, our communities of interest, so that we can have some really good quality engagement at the point which we do the full review to move forward to probably what will be then a 4-year or 5-year horizon for the next strategy.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. I don't expect sort of an answer today because it is a live document and it may change when we get down the road. I just want the other thing was transport. I know it's about doing things that we can have control over. However, transport runs as a thread through much of what we do, and the issues it potentially creates for us. I noticed in the Appendix 7, the action plan, we've got transport and connectivity sitting in one place, and then further down, got transport and connectivity again, just so that we have the opportunity to use what influence we can to make improvements elsewhere. I'd kind of like to see them perhaps in one place, or I don't know. I just felt that it was broken up into different places, and maybe to give it some strength, it needs to be in one place. And that's just for your consideration. And I'd be happy to engage with that because it's something that I think people know, not only that, you know, the transport we need for people, but the walking and cycle infrastructure and the things that we need for people to get around in our communities. So
I think it's recognising that transport and connectivity, some of the issues relate to a number of different areas of sustainability, and also they benefit people's mental health and well-being. So we're trying to use transport and connectivity in terms of our own influence in the areas we feel that we can have the most influence. It's likely that moving forward, it will be looking at how we can lobby or draw in funding to influence transport much more widely. And we wanted to note the environmental aspect of transport as well. So it does feature across the board, and our local plan is one key document which will influence transport as well.
Yeah, no, I accept that it goes in many areas and it should be aimed at what we can do. But I just think it's something that we can draw out because it's across so many, and actually, you know, externally lobby as hard as we can for that. Thank you. That was it.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Angie, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members. Karen, have you paid any attention? That's perhaps a bit of a harsh word, but I am aware that there are additional stress levels in coastal erosion and flood risk zones. We had a particularly useful presentation in respect of mental health in coastal zones in the CP conference in 2019. And I don't actually see much of this being highlighted in this report, and I would ask that perhaps we could look at that in a bit more depth.
I suppose what I would say is the Thriving Places Index, because it is a national index, doesn't necessarily recognise the fact that an area is a coastal area. So it recognises rurality and things like that. And that's why we reference the Health in Coastal Communities report from Chris Whitty. So we are very conscious that is a report that we need to look at in much more detail in terms of the context of this particular piece of work. It has some really useful pointers to how coastal communities are particularly affected. It was about health and well-being rather than quality of life, but we felt it was sufficiently important because health and well-being is this so you know, important as an aspect of of quality of life. So that is a document that we will be looking at in much more detail, looking at you know, other coastal communities and some of the issues that they're having, and how we might, you know, perhaps look at good practice elsewhere. And obviously the engagement aspect, when we come to that in terms of our communities, I'm sure those issues will come through much more. But we did focus, and, you know, because it was an evidence base, and in the absence of that strong engagement with and understanding the priorities from our communities, we felt we needed to go with a really robust evidence base. And that's why most of the strategy is based around the Thriving Places Index and the elements against which we are less strong compared to the England average. And so that's perhaps why, in terms of the action plan, we did put some other issues in there that didn't come out, but I think it's a bit of work, and happy to work with you and the coastal team to explore those areas. They obviously are doing a huge amount of work, and this strategy also recognises that it captures work across the whole of the county council, not just you know, one particular area. So hence it's referenced all of those documents, and some of those issues are going to come through in the local plan as well. So there will be work that's being undertaken elsewhere, and other strategies that recognise that work too. But yeah, I think because it is the first time we've done this quality of life strategy, that's an area I'm sure which will develop. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Okay.
Yeah,
Go
I'm
ahead.
grateful for that. I did point Councillor Gay to the Chris Whitty report, which came to the local government coastal SIG, because I thought it was particularly valuable for us as the most dynamic coastal zone in Europe.
Thank you, Angie. Brilliant. Okay, Steve and then Lucy.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think there are real opportunities. Members will no doubt be aware of the recently formed, at the moment, Shadow Health and Wellbeing Partnership. I think there are real opportunities within that across partners to work on some of these particular issues as they relate to both our district, but also down at that sort of hyper local level in terms of particular communities or particular issues that affect our communities. And by community, I'm not just talking about a geographical location, I'm talking about particular groups of shared interest, etc. So I think there's a real opportunity to flag some things through both that partnership and into other groups or the other partners that work alongside us in that respect. So I don't think it's been ignored, Angie. I think it's probably just, it may be sitting slightly differently.
Lucy, go ahead.
Thank you. The one thing that excites me most about this, and I'm really grateful to Steve Hems for actually helping me manage my excitement. This has been one of the most exciting strategies for me, because quality of life underpins the reason why I stood for election. It underpins the reason why I get up every day and do what I do for our communities. So this is a really exciting document for me anyway. And I know that I sit with colleagues who genuinely do this to improve people's lives. So that's even more exciting. I wanted to just touch back on the mental health situation overall, because I know that recently we've had a very disappointing inspection of our mental health trust. There are lots of questions to be asked. But what I would like to pay tribute to now is our primary care network, who are working really hard to try and bridge that gap with mental health. And in particular, the team at Birchwood Medical Practice, who are probably going to be quite embarrassed that I'm mentioning them. But they have taken a great understanding of the community and a great understanding of how they can really improve people's mental health and well-being through their Healthier North Walsham programme. And I feel that if we can work with our local communities and local partners, that these projects can really make a massive benefit. So touching back on what Councillor Toy said earlier, whilst we're not on point to deliver everything, and I say deliver, this isn't a pizza, this is a fantastic strategy. We are not on point to deliver everything, but we can influence and we can help and we can shape. And I think that's where our strength comes from, really. And on that note, I'm absolutely delighted to second this. Thank
Very
you.
well said, very well said. Were there any other questions? Okay, well, sorry, Nigel, go ahead.
Just before you move to the vote, Mr. Chairman, I would just like for the record to be clear on the matter that I raised on that recommendation, whether or not you are, whatever your decision, will be considering the inclusion of the demonstrable and measurable outcomes as that panel had recommended.
Yeah, it sounded from the words given to us by Virginia, which Wendy read out, that it has been sort of considered, and I believe Councillor Potter was thanked for that work. I think it's very welcome. Steve, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. It will be. I think the work on that will not be complete for a while, because we want to do some work again with Councillor Holliday in order to develop her initial thoughts still further, and to make sure that actually, in terms of those areas of focus, we are fully understanding of how we demonstrate what our strategy and our approach contribute to that. I think one of the complexities of quality of life and some of those indicators or some of those elements in terms of our action plan activity is that so many things influence the outcome of those. The challenge for us is about making sure that we are able to demonstrate our contribution, and to be reasonably content that the outcome is derived from that and not from some other factor. So it will take a piece of some work to do, but certainly the intention is that we will continue to work with Councillor Holliday and others in order to develop those across a number of areas.
Thank you, Nigel. Go ahead.
Yeah, the purpose of my question really was, I think I was fairly convinced that you were taking that forward in that way at officer level, if you like. I just really wanted to make sure that from a cabinet decision-making point of view, the clarity of that decision, whether you are including those measures in your decision or not. And I will need to report back to the panel in due course on whether that recommendation was accepted or declined.
Well, sorry, I've got an indication. John, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just think that I think it's clear, you know, if I talk as a member individually, but it's clear to me that officers will take that into consideration. It is a living document. Which ones will be used and won't be used need to be investigated by them. So as a member, if you like, that sits on this committee, then I support that going forward, but I don't think at this point we can say which ones will be used. We need to give officers time to look at that and advise us.
Sure, but it's a very welcome intervention, and yeah.
That nobody was expecting which ones or
exactly
how developed they would be. It's the principle that those outcomes would be included, and it's recognised that there's work to be done. But I just think that from a clarity of decision making, it's really important to make sure that that either is included or isn't, and that's a matter obviously for you and your cabinet to decide.
Okay, so what you're asking is specifically whether there would be an amendment to the recommendations. Is that something you wish to consider at this time, or at a later stage? Yeah, later stage. Lucy, sorry.
What would the specific wording be that you would like included, Councillor Dixon, just so I can be clear?
I think we'd be happy with that. I don't think there's any problem. Are we happy to accept that? Yeah. Okay, so we include that within our recommendation, if that's okay. Wendy, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
As a proposer, yeah, I'm fully behind that recommendation. I'd also like to say how lovely it is actually for somebody to come forward with offers of help and not shy away from helping the progress of this council. So thank you.
Fantastic. No, very welcome intervention. Okay, so were there any others? John, go ahead.
Thank you. Just very quickly, and really from a personal point of view, a little bit of a note of caution. On page 60, under your big issue housing strategy, which I applaud everything that's in there, but I would just add from experience, just be very careful that we learn the lessons, because at the weekend it was re-announced that the possibility of the right to buy programme may well be reintroduced. That will be a big effect. It was very debatable last time. I just think we need to be very careful and look at the lessons that were there last time. We don't want to fall into that trap again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Steve.
I think that point is very well made, Councillor Est. I think the quality of life strategy is something that this administration has said it wishes to see taken forward and brought together in a single space. But I think you've heard this morning that around the Shadow Health and Wellbeing Board, the issues with the CQC judgment on the Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust, these are not things which are totally within the gift of this authority to bring about change ourselves. So we can influence, or we can seek to influence, we can work in partnership, and I think we do that very well, and the document outlines where we work in partnership. But we cannot be accountable for all of the achievements or measures that people might wish to see in this document. And I think in terms of corporate understanding, that's an important position for us all as elected members and officers to appreciate, because I think we have ambitions for our communities, but it isn't in our total gift to deliver against all of those. So I don't have any problem with the recommendation that you've been asked to take, or the amendment that's come from the Over Scrutiny panel, but I think it does have to be seen in that context. We are not masters of our own destiny in this context.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Is that okay, John? Steve Hems.
Thank you. I just want to seek some clarity on Councillor Dixon's clarity, if I may. So I absolutely understand the desire to include the development of those further measures, but I just want to be clear about the word subject to, or the word subject to, that we're not adopting the strategy. The recommendation is almost in fact that there is development, or the strategy will include the development of those measures. I just don't want to be in a position where at some point someone in the future says you never adopted the strategy because you haven't developed the measures. I don't think I'm talking counter to Councillor Dixon's intent, but it's just that word subject to make sure that we're not putting a caveat on the adoption of the strategy.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Steve. That's helpful.
If it helps, I could just put a paragraph under the action plan to add a paragraph to say that we will be developing the measures further. So it's actually there within the strategy itself.
Okay, thank you. We do need a seconder for the amended recommendation. Lucy, happy to do that again.
I think we just check what the amendment is now.
Yeah, sure.
If we could check that, because Steve raised the point that the adoption of the strategy shouldn't be subject to something else that could delay.
Yeah, it should be including rather than subject to. Yeah.
So could it be the recommendation as is set out with the addition of the words "and to include development of inclusion of demonstrable outcomes to be included in," sorry, what section of the strategy? To be included in Appendix 7 of the strategy.
Yeah, thank you, Karen.
Appendix 6 of the strategy.
Jim, could we have that read out to us so we're quite clear?
Okay, so it's recommended that the Cabinet approves the quality of life strategy and action plan, and to include the development of inclusive and demonstrable outcomes to be included in Appendix 7 of the strategy.
I think you may be getting slightly stronger than consideration and a commitment to include them.
Yeah, I think we've sort of covered this, haven't we? I think that's fine. Are you both happy in terms of that? Were there any other questions? Okay. Well, if we move to the vote, can we have all in favour, please? That's unanimous. Thank you so much, and thank you again, Karen. That's fantastic work. Thank you, Steve, and others that have helped here. Just before we move on, I just wanted to say I have had apologies from Councillor Lloyd. He's got a medical appointment, and the Tuesday starts the week through. So my best wishes. Item 10 on the agenda is property transaction and North Lodge Park. Eric, are you kicking us off here?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Officer Neil Turvey is here this morning to flesh out details and provide any answers to questions. The terms of the lease are in purple papers, so clearly if members wish to discuss the specifics of that or to go into it, then we will have to go into private business. The recommendation is set out here on page 65, and the detail of what is proposed here is contained on page 68, paragraph 3.1. What this reflects is this council's continuing intention and support to help the redevelopment of North Lodge Park. We are very pleased that through working with both the Friends of the Park and Cromer Town Council, that we have this recommendation in front of us today. This is to develop the old tennis courts on the site, which, Mr. Chairman, you are more aware than I am of what a derelict state this is in. For a mixed use of the site as a community hub, utilising the former bandstand, the provision of new horticultural polytunnels and greenhouses for horticultural training purposes and plant sales, an occasional artisan farmers market, and provision for a community shed managed by Men's Sheds, which is a national charity for supporting men through practical courses and meetings. So that is what is proposed, and I am pleased to move this recommendation.
Neil, did you want to say anything? Thank you. Angie, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a next door neighbour to this, if you like. Poppyland and Cromer actually border themselves. I'm sure you all know that. I think we have to congratulate the Friends of North Lodge Park in particular, who started quite some years ago taking over and putting the park into some good order. They've proved a great success. They're obviously very keen. They're looking after their local assets, and I'm more than happy to second the proposal that they work with Cromer Town Council. And I will be delighted to get these tennis courts sorted out because they have been a mess for years. So please support the proposal.
Yes, thank you, Angie. I think it's fair to say quite a few of us have had a bit of skin in this game previously. It's been, certainly a consideration of what these two councils for a number of years. So just to stress, first of all, I haven't had any involvement with this project per se from a town council point of view, but very pleased to see what's progressing. There had been some media coverage over the weekend concerning the cafe, but just to stress, Friends of North Lodge Park and Crepes and Cakes Limited, which from the cafe are separate entities. But I'm hopeful that the cafe certainly will reopen and the future is bright for the park. Were there any other? Nigel, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question relates to what's in the purple papers, but I'm not sure that the question necessarily or the answer necessarily needs to go into part 2. My clarification that I seek is on page 77 in relation to 6.1, and it concerns basically, my clarification was how was the base rent determined? So without a need to reveal what that is, I'm really interested more in the methodology that went into the determination of that figure.
It is a difficult one to determine, but we worked on comparables of similar scenarios in the district based on the tenant investing substantial amounts of money, and therefore the base rent needs to be relatively low in the short term for them to start recouping and repaying at a later date. So it's really based on comparable ground rent levels that we have for similar sites across the district.
Great, thank you. Were there any other questions? Are we happy to move to the recommendation, which was seconded by Angie? Okay, all of those in favour? That's unanimous. Item 11, no reason to exclude the press and public and no private business. So thank you.